There was a time when angels didn't just watch from above, they walked among men. When humanity didn't just sin, but mingled their blood with the fallen. A forgotten age of giants, of darkness, of sacred defiance, until the heavens wept and the earth was drowned in judgment. And then, the door was shut, not by human hands, but by the hand of God Himself. Watch this video to the end, and God will bless you. Close your eyes. Imagine a time forgotten, not just by history books, but by the very echoes of time itself. A time before the storms, before the tides swallowed the land, before man first tasted the fruit of rebellion. Long before the pages of Genesis were written, there existed a realm bathed in divine light and eternal stillness. It was not the world you know. It was a realm of sacred order and trembling glory, a world that would one day become the battlefield of heaven and hell. This is where our story begins, not with man, not with Adam, but with a chorus of stars. In the book of Job, God asks a question that rumbles through eternity. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And then comes the sacred revelation. When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. These morning stars were not celestial rocks. They were angelic beings, radiant with light, pure in spirit, overflowing with the power and wisdom of the one who formed them. Creation was not born in silence. It was born in song. But not all melodies endure. Among the radiant hosts was one being magnificent, powerful, the crown of heaven's beauty. His name meant Lightbringer, Lucifer. He stood at the throne's right side, burning with a brilliance not of his own making, but borrowed from the majesty that breathed him into being. And yet, something stirred within him. Not praise, not reverence, but ambition. And ambition is a holy fire misused. The fall of angels is not a myth. It is a fracture in eternity. Scripture, like a veil barely lifted, reveals glimpses of this cosmic rebellion. Most angels remained loyal, steadfast in their adoration of the Most High, but others, driven by pride, abandoned their original station. In the Epistle of Jude, we read of angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper dwelling. They exchanged heaven's radiance for chains of darkness, not because they were tricked, but because they chose. They chose rebellion. And they were not alone. Lucifer, no longer bearing light, became Satan, the adversary, the deceiver. And from heaven's heights, he led a third of the angelic hosts into open war against the Almighty. This was not a battle of blades. It was a battle of wills, of glory, of dominion. Satan did not want to destroy heaven. He wanted to rule it. He failed. Jesus himself declared, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." That flash was not merely cosmic, it was catastrophic. It tore through the spirit realm, echoing through all creation. Lucifer and his followers were cast down, expelled from the kingdom they once called home. But their exile was not the end. It was the beginning of another war. For though they had lost heaven, Satan found a new battlefield, earth. God had created a garden, not merely a place of beauty, but a sanctuary, Eden. In Hebrew, Eden means delight. And in that sacred place, God walked with man. Adam and Eve, formed from dust and breath, stood as divine representatives. They were given authority over the earth, to name, to tend, to walk in intimacy with the Creator. But Satan saw them not as caretakers. He saw them as invaders. Earth was his new domain now, and Eden was a threat. So he hatched a plan, not of swords, but of whispers, not of fire, but of words. The serpent's first strike came with a question. Did God really say? Doubt was the gateway drug of the soul. Then came deception. You will not surely die. And finally, temptation. You will be like God. 3 moves. 1 collapse. Eve ate. Adam followed. And the breach was made. Sin entered like a shadow. The garden's gates closed behind them. Humanity had taken its first step away from the light, and the serpent had won a round. But not the war. Even in judgment, God prophesied redemption. One would come born of the woman who would crush the serpent's head. Still, the wound was real, and blood would soon follow. Cain and Abel. First sons of Adam and Eve were born into a world still heavy with consequence. Abel honored God with his offerings. Cain did not. Cain's heart boiled. When God warned him to master the sin crouching at his door, Cain refused. He led his brother into a field and slaughtered him in cold rage. The first murder, the first grave. And from that soil of shame, 2 lineages began. One of violence, one of faith. God marked Cain not to curse, but to preserve. Yet Cain fled east of Eden, building a city, and beginning a legacy of innovation and blood. His descendants were remarkable: Jabal, father of herdsmen; Jubal, father of music; Tubal-Cain, master of metal. Civilization advanced, but so did sin. Polygamy, pride, revenge. Cain's line grew darker with each generation. One of his descendants, Lamech, boasted of murder like a badge of honor. But not all was lost. Adam and Eve bore another son, Seth. And through him, a new line began. Unlike Cain's prideful offerings, Seth's descendants called upon the name of the Lord. This was not religion. It was desperation. A cry for communion. A remnant began to form. And through that remnant, God would one day choose a man named Noah. But we are not there yet. The world before the flood was not a fairy tale. It was a war zone, cloaked in innocence. A paradise corrupted from within. A spiritual battleground where invisible forces fought for the soul of creation. And though some still walked with God, the shadows were lengthening. In the chapters to come, the bloodline of Cain will twist, the Nephilim will rise, and angels will once again descend to earth, but this time not to sing, this time to take. The gate to Eden had closed, not just in geography, but in spirit. The presence of God, once tangible, near so overwhelming, was now a distant memory for the children of dust. And yet, life went on. Outside the garden, Adam and Eve bore 2 sons. But the world into which Cain and Abel were born was already fractured. The soil they tilled was cursed. The air they breathed carried the scent of exile. Still they worshipped. Both brothers brought offerings to God. Abel brought the best of his flock, an act of humility, of blood, of dependence. Cain brought the fruit of his labor, proud, polished, but not surrendered. God saw their hearts more clearly than their gifts. He accepted Abel's offering. Cain's he rejected, and that rejection ignited something ancient in Cain's soul: jealousy, wounded pride, rage. God in mercy came to him, spoke to him. Sin is crouching at your door. He warned, and it desires to have you. But you must rule over it. A divine plea, a second chance. But Cain turned his back on the voice of grace. He invited his brother into a field and spilled innocent blood on sacred soil. The earth trembled. God asked him, "Where is your brother?" Cain's cold reply is still echoing in every generation of betrayal. Am I my brother's keeper? And then the curse, not one of annihilation, but of alienation. Cain was marked not for death, but for exile. God placed a sign on him, one that said to the world, "Do not touch him," a living reminder that vengeance belongs to the Lord, even for the guilty. Cain fled eastward, and east of Eden, he built a city. A strange thing for a man who had no home. He named the city after his son Enoch. It was the first city in human history, born from blood, raised in the shadow of rebellion. It became the cradle of a civilization, both brilliant and brutal. Cain's descendants were gifted, innovators, architects of a new society. Jabal taught people to live in tents and raise cattle. Jubal invented instruments, string and wind, harps, and flutes that echoed through valleys. Tubal-Cain forged tools of bronze and iron, shaping a new age with fire and hammer. It was the rise of culture, of trade, of music, of industry. But behind the progress, darkness festered. Lamech, a descendant of Cain, declared his own vengeance. If Cain's punishment was 7-fold, Lamech demanded 77. He glorified murder. He celebrated violence. He turned sin into a crown. Humanity was no longer just surviving. It was becoming proud of its corruption. And yet, even in this unraveling world, there was another thread. After Abel's death and Cain's departure, Adam and Eve bore another son, Seth. And through Seth, God began a quiet restoration, a remnant, a line not of rebellion, but of reverence. Seth's children were different. They did not worship themselves. They called upon the name of the Lord. They were the ones who remembered the garden not as myth, but as memory. The ones who still longed for the voice in the wind. The two bloodlines, Cain's and Seth's, became the two paths of humanity. One pointed inward. The other looked upward. One trusted in tools and violence. The other in sacrifice and prayer. And from these two lineages, the future would be shaped. The world began to fill. Men lived long lives. Centuries. Time stretched like rivers through valleys untouched by modern decay. Adam lived 930 years. His son Seth lived over 900 as well. These were not fables. These were the ancients' men who carried wisdom, who remembered the voice of God, who told stories by firelight of angels and Eden, and a promise that had not yet come to pass. From Seth's line came men like Enosh, like Kenan, like Mahalalel, and then, one day, a child named Enoch, not the son of Cain, but a different Enoch, this one born into faith, not fury. When Enoch was 65 years old, he had a son named Methuselah, and the world changed again. For Enoch walked with God. That phrase, so simple, so quiet, is a thunderclap in Scripture. In a world that was rushing toward darkness, one man chose to walk with the light, not run ahead, not fall behind, but walk in rhythm, in step, in communion. Enoch's walk was so pure, so deep, so intimate, that God did something unprecedented. He took him. Enoch did not die. He vanished, taken by the one who made him, swallowed into the eternal embrace. It was the first recorded rapture in the Bible, the first time the veil was lifted without the sting of death. The book of Hebrews would later say, "He was taken from this life so that he did not experience death." A man of whom the world was not worthy. But Enoch's disappearance was not an escape. It was a sign, a signal that even in the growing madness, heaven still watched. Heaven still acted. His son Methuselah would live longer than any man, 969 years, a living witness to a decaying world, a grandfather to a boy named Noah. But we're not there yet, because before Noah there was a slow, relentless slide. Civilization grew. Tribes formed. Professions multiplied. Musicians played. Smiths forged. Cities rose. But so did depravity. It was not sudden. It was generational. The heart of man, unchecked, grew harder. The further they wandered from Eden's memory, the closer they came to forgetting they were ever sacred. By now, the world was no longer a reflection of God's image. It had become a mirror of man's corruption, and the watchers were watching. In the next part, we will descend into the terrifying mystery of Genesis 6, the arrival of the Nephilim, the union of angels and women, and the full unraveling of the human spirit. The earth grew crowded. Sons and daughters of Adam filled the land. Valleys hummed with life. Cities rose from the soil, and voices echoed from mountain to mountain. civilization expanded. But with every birth, the distance from Eden widened. And though humanity multiplied, the soul of the world thinned. A sacred silence, once thick like incense, had lifted. The memory of the garden was fading, and in that silence, something descended. It did not come from earth. It came from beyond it. Scripture tells us in Genesis 6, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Who were these sons of God? In the book of Job, they are described as angels, celestial beings, formed to worship, not to lust. These were not mortals. They were once wrapped in light, part of the heavenly host. But not all had remained loyal. A faction cast from heaven during Lucifer's rebellion still roamed the unseen realms, burning with unfinished purpose. Now they watched humanity from afar. And what they saw stirred something dark within them: desire. These fallen angels, corrupted by pride and driven by forbidden hunger, descended upon the world. Not as messengers, not as guardians, but as violators. They crossed the boundary between heaven and earth, not to deliver a word from God, but to corrupt His creation at its root. They took women. Beautiful, vulnerable, mortal women. They defied the natural order, the laws of heaven, the will of the Most High. And from their union, something monstrous was born. The Nephilim. The name means fallen ones. They were giants, physically immense, but spiritually deformed. Neither fully divine nor fully human. They walked the earth as living heresies, towering reminders that the boundary between heaven and hell had been breached. They were strong, fierce, famous. Men trembled before them. They became kings, conquerors, legends. But they were not gods. They were abominations, and their very presence distorted the world. Morality warped. Reverence died. Men no longer worshipped the Creator. They bowed before the powerful. They sought alliance with giants rather than the Holy One. The image of God in mankind dimmed like a dying flame. The infection spread. Genesis 6:5 declares, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." Let those words settle. Every inclination, only evil, all the time. This was no longer a world off course. It was a world possessed, and God, who formed man with His own hands, who breathed life into dust, who walked in the cool of Eden, looked upon His creation and wept. It is one of Scripture's most haunting revelations. God grieved. The one who is perfect, eternal, unchanging, felt sorrow, not weakness, not regret in error, but divine mourning, a holy ache that human language cannot contain. Genesis 6:6 says, "The Lord regretted that He had made human beings on the earth, and His heart was deeply troubled." Imagine that. The Creator wounded by His creation, not because He made a mistake, but because the ones He loved chose to become unrecognizable. Instead of stewards, they became destroyers. Instead of sons, they became monsters. Violence filled the earth. Justice collapsed. Marriage became mockery. The family became a battlefield. Governments turned into engines of oppression. Love became lust. Truth became myth. And worst of all, God was forgotten. Then he spoke. Genesis 6:7. So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them. It was not wrath. It was cleansing. This was not the fury of a tyrant. This was the weeping decree of a righteous king. The world had become so corrupted, so thoroughly infested with spiritual decay, that only purification through destruction could remain. The flood was not vengeance. It was surgery, a sacred reset, a cosmic baptism. But even as the decree thundered across the heavens, there remained a glimmer, a whisper in the wind, a single ember still glowing. Noah, one man, in all the madness, he stood out, not because he was mighty, not because he was eloquent, but because he walked with God. Like Enoch before him, Noah moved in step with the divine. He resisted the pull of his generation. He refused to bend to the Nephilim. He ignored the glitter of idols. He was not perfect, but he was faithful, and that faith caught the eye of heaven. Genesis 6:8. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. The world was a storm cloud. Noah was a lamp, and through him, God would preserve not just a family, but a future. In the next part, the great warning will come. A command to build something the world had never seen. A wooden vessel of impossible size, a final chance, a rising judgment, and the long echoing sound of hammers against hollow planks as the ark begins to take shape. The earth was no longer merely wicked, it was unraveling. The shadows that crept in through pride and rebellion had now become kingdoms. Violence was common currency. Idolatry passed as culture. Demonic bloodlines ruled as gods. And yet in the middle of this nightmare, one man walked against the tide. Noah. He did not shout. He did not fight. He walked quiet, faithful, obedient. In a time when sin was celebrated, Noah remained steady. He was not seduced by giants or drawn into the glittering cities of Cain's descendants. He lived quietly, purely. He raised his family with reverence. And because of this, heaven took notice. Genesis 6:9 declares, Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Those words, so simple, are thunder in the spirit world. For when heaven seeks a vessel, it searches not for perfection, but for devotion. Noah was chosen, and to him God whispered the unthinkable. A storm is coming, but it would not be like any before it. Not wind, not sand, not mere rain. Water would rise from the earth, skies would weep, creation itself would be reset. It would not be just a flood. It would be a burial. And only one sanctuary would remain above the waters. God gave Noah a command, one both sacred and impossible. Build an ark, not a boat, not a raft. A floating sanctuary, a vessel of salvation, a monument of obedience built in the middle of dry land. And with that command, the world's final countdown began. The Lord was not vague. He gave Noah precise instructions, every cubit, every layer, every plank. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, he said. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. Genesis 14. He was told to make it 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. In today's measure, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet tall. Larger than any ship the world had ever seen or imagined. A single door, a single window, 3 decks. It was a vessel of design, not desperation. Every detail had meaning, every nail a prophecy. But imagine the scene. A man in the middle of a generation that worshipped corruption begins cutting down trees, not to build a city, not to forge weapons, but to prepare for judgment. The whispers began first, then the mocking. What are you building, old man? A boat. Here. Rain from where? You're insane. But Noah said nothing. He lifted timber. He struck hammer to wood. He shaped the ribs of the ark like bones for a sleeping giant. For years he worked, sweating, aging, ignored by the world. Yet not once did he stop. Because faith moves before the rain falls. Because obedience is louder than applause. Noah warned them. Scripture says he was a preacher of righteousness. 2 Peter chapter. He did not hide in silence. He told them of the flood to come. He pointed to the sky. He pled with their hearts. But their ears were sealed, their eyes blind, their spirits drunk on darkness. And so the work continued. As the world partied, Noah prepared. As the Nephilim multiplied, he carved beams. As kings conquered, he gathered pitch and tar. He worked as if time had weight, and all the while, God continued to speak. When the structure was complete, the Lord gave him further commands. Noah was to bring aboard his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. 8 souls in total. 8, the number of new beginnings. But they would not sail alone. Bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. Genesis 6:19. 2 of every unclean animal. 7 of every clean animal. Birds, beasts, crawling things. A parade of creation called not by instinct, but by divine guidance. It was not chaos. It was choreography. Even in judgment, God preserves order. Even in wrath, he remembers mercy. And Noah obeyed. Not partially, not hesitantly, but fully. Thus Noah did. According to all that God commanded him, so he did. Genesis 6:22. No compromise, no shortcuts. His faith had taken shape in wood and pitch. His reverence had become architecture. But time was running out. The world outside still danced, still drank, still married and made merry. They mocked the strange ship and the old man's warnings. They saw no sky breaking. They felt no wind shift. Their gods were silent. Their giants still roared. But the clock of heaven was ticking. One day, God would say enough. But before the storm would rise, he would seal his own inside the ark. And then, the first drop would fall. In the next part, the animals will enter, the door will shut, and the floodgates of both sky and earth will open. It will not just be a storm, it will be a baptism, a judgment, a rebirth. The ark stood complete, silent, immense. A wooden monolith on dry land, rising like a question that no one dared to answer. It creaked in the wind hollow as a warning bell. To those who passed by, it was a joke, a curiosity, a monument to madness. But heaven had not forgotten. The time had come. Noah, now an old man, stood at the base of the ark as the first rumble stirred beneath the soil. But it wasn't thunder, not yet. It was something deeper, a shift in the unseen, a holy finality settling over the earth like a shroud. Then came the procession. Animals emerged from forests, plains, deserts, drawn by no call of man, but by the whisper of the Almighty. 2 by 2 they came, male and female, creeping things, wild beasts, birds of every color, a holy migration with no trumpet, no guard, no leash. People watched, laughed. Is this a zoo now? Where's the storm, Noah? But the animals obeyed, and with solemn reverence, they entered the ark, not in panic, not in confusion, as if they knew better than men what was about to come. 7 of every clean animal, 2 of every unclean. Even the smallest sparrow found its way through the door. Inside the ark became a world within a world, a sanctuary of breath and heartbeat. Then came Noah's family, 8 souls, the last faithful among the living. They climbed aboard, and then the door shut. But it was not Noah who closed it. It was God. Genesis 7:16 says, "Then the Lord shut him in." A pause, a silence, the kind of silence that happens just before everything ends. Outside, the skies were still. The people partied. They joked about the animals, about the ship, about the prophecy. But inside the ark, the atmosphere had changed. Noah sat in darkness, surrounded by beasts and wood and breath. There was no turning back. The world he had known would soon no longer exist. And then the first drop fell. It struck the ark's roof with a sound like a heartbeat. Then another, and another, and another. The sky, once dry for generations, opened like a wound, and the heavens began to weep. But it wasn't just the sky. The earth itself groaned. Genesis 7:11 says, "All the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. From beneath, water exploded upward, cracking through rock, soil, bone. The ocean rose from the belly of the earth. From above, sheets of rain fell, Not gentle, not slow, but torrential, endless, furious. It was as if creation itself wanted to erase the memory of man. The rivers overflowed, mountains disappeared, the mocking stopped, laughter turned to screams, doors were beaten, fists pounded the sides of the ark, names were shouted. Faces once familiar now pressed in terror against a vessel they had once scorned. But the door would not open because God had closed it. Outside, judgment raged. Inside, stillness. The ark rose, lifted not by magic, but by consequence. It floated as the dead lay beneath. Noah's hands trembled. His sons wept. His wife clung to him in silence. This was not a victory. It was survival. Noah had obeyed. But obedience, when righteous, is often lonely. Day after day, the rain did not stop. 40 nights, 40 days, endless water, endless loss. What had once been hills were now memory. Cities vanished. The giants gone. The kings silenced. The Nephilim drowned with their fame. Even those who had never heard the warning were swept away. Because righteousness does not require widespread understanding. Only obedience. The ark drifted, no sails, no compass, no anchor, only God, and still. The rain fell, and inside the ark, humanity waited. With each wave, Noah knew the world was being washed clean. The blood spilled by Cain, the boasts of Lamech, the shrines to false gods, the whispers of fallen angels, all of it buried beneath a sea, not of rage, but of grief. Because this flood was not only wrath, it was mercy. Mercy for what would come next. A reset, a rebirth, a chance to begin again, not from Eden, but from the ark, from obedience, not innocence. But the pain remained. It is easy to imagine the flood as a divine storm, but harder to imagine it as a heartbreak. For every soul lost was once formed by God's hand. Every drowned voice had once been made in His image. And yet, righteousness demanded it, because holiness cannot coexist with corruption, because sometimes love must purge to protect. And so the ark remained, adrift in an endless ocean, a coffin for the old world, a cradle for the new, and inside 8 souls, waiting, watching, weeping, wondering if they would ever see the sun again. But God had not forgotten them. In the next part, the waters will begin to recede. The ark will find rest, and the first covenant of redemption will be written not with ire or sword, but with a rainbow in the sky. The rain had stopped, but silence had taken its place. No more pounding drops, no more crashing waves, only the low creaking of timber and the rhythm of breath. Noah opened the small window one the Lord had told him to make. The air was still, heavy, clean, and yet unfamiliar. Below the ark was not land, not yet, only water, endless glistening water stretching from horizon to horizon. A blue grave for a broken world. The ark drifted. Days passed, weeks. Then, on the 17th day of the 7th month, the vessel groaned against something firm. Beneath its hull rock, the ark had come to rest on the mountains of Ararat, not by the hand of man, not by sails or stars, but by the guidance of God. Still, Noah did not rush out. He waited. He sent out a raven first, then a dove. The dove returned no place to land. He waited 7 more days, sent the dove again. This time it returned with an olive leaf, a trembling signal that life had survived somewhere beneath the deep. 7 days later, he sent it once more. It never came back. Hope had taken flight. And so, after more than a year, Noah stepped out. On to new soil. The first footsteps of humanity on a world reborn. Can you imagine it? The sky above him was vast. The mountains silent. The air crisp as Eden. There were no cities, no altars, no blood-stained fields. The noise of sin had been silenced, but Noah knew something must come first. Not a home, not a wall, not a plan, an altar. Before planting, before hunting, before settling, Noah built an altar to the Lord. He took some of every clean animal, those God had told him to preserve, and offered them upon the stones. The smoke rose like a prayer. It was the first act of the new world, and God received it. Genesis 8:21. The Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood." Here, in the ashes of sacrifice, God made a promise, not to Noah alone, but to every generation after him. A vow, not of revenge, but of restraint. I will never again destroy all living creatures as I have done, he said. And then God painted his words into the sky, a bow, a rainbow, a symbol, not just of beauty, but of covenant. Genesis 9:13. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. It was not a threat. It was a vow, not signed in ink, but in light. The rainbow was shaped like a warrior's bow, but turned upward, facing heaven, not man. A sign that God had hung up his weapon. That though man would sin again, God would not respond with total destruction. Mercy had found a foothold, and to Noah and his sons, God gave a blessing. Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth. It was the same command once given to Adam. The same breath that had launched the first man now reignited the second beginning. But this time it came with new boundaries, new reverence, a fresh understanding of blood life and the holiness of breath. God gave them dominion, but reminded them life is sacred. Every animal, every man, every drop of blood cried out to heaven. And with this, the new world began. The mountains bore witness, the winds listened, and somewhere, far above the throne of heaven, watched not with sorrow, this time, but with hope. Still, Noah was no god. He was flesh, and the world he stepped into, though cleansed, was still fragile. Though the giants were gone, and the old cities buried, the human heart remained vulnerable. The same inclination toward pride, the same temptation to forget. But God had left something behind. Not just land, not just trees and sky. He left a covenant, not only with Noah, but with every living creature. Genesis 9:12. This is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you, and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. God's love was not narrowed to man alone. It extended to beast, to bird, to creeping thing. All creation had suffered. Now, all creation was included, and every time it rained, every time the sky wept, that bow would return, not to threaten, but to remind the earth that its maker had chosen mercy over wrath, patience over punishment. But heaven's patience is not permission, it is an invitation. Noah knew this. And as he looked into the sky, into the colors stitched by divine light, he understood what had been entrusted to him. He was not just a survivor. He was a steward, a priest of the new creation. His sons would build, his grandchildren would scatter, but their lives would unfold under the shadow of a covenant, and the echo of judgment would never fully fade. In the final part, the story will turn inward, toward the legacy of Noah's sons, the seeds of future nations, and the quiet reminder that even after the flood, humanity still bleeds. The flood was over. The ark now rested not just on dry land, but in history. The animals scattered into valleys and mountains. The sky was bright again. The earth breathed a new rhythm, and yet something deeper lingered. Though the waters had washed away cities, giants, and corrupted bloodlines, they had not washed away the nature of man, because while the world was new, the heart of man was still ancient. Noah, now the patriarch of a new humanity, began the work of rebuilding. His sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, spread out. Families grew. Languages formed. Tribes emerged. Civilization, like a vine cut at the base, began to climb again slowly, tentatively, and with roots still soaked in memory. But soon came a moment, small, strange, and telling. Noah planted a vineyard. It was simple work, noble, honest, a return to the soil. But one day, from the fruit of that vine, he made wine, and from the wine, he lost himself. He drank too much. He lay uncovered in his tent, naked, exposed, vulnerable. And in that moment, the seeds of a new fracture were sown. Ham, his son, saw his father's nakedness and mocked it. Instead of covering the shame, he exposed it. Shem and Japheth, in contrast, took a garment, walked backward, and gently covered their father, without ever turning to gaze upon his shame. It was a moment insignificant to the eye, but not to the spirit, because what happened that day was a repeat of Eden, a replay of what happens when one man sees weakness and chooses pride while another chooses compassion. When Noah awoke, he knew, and from his mouth came a prophecy not of vengeance, but of trajectory. Cursed be Canaan, he said of Ham's lineage. A servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. And to Shem, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Genesis 9:25-26. The 3 sons of Noah would become the 3 great branches of post-flood humanity. From Shem would come Abraham, and from him the people of Israel. From Japheth, the nations of the west. From Ham, many of the peoples of Africa and the ancient East. But already, division had begun. The flood had cleansed the earth, but it had not yet changed the soul. And so slowly, subtly, humanity slipped again. Nations rose, idols returned, power became lust. God was no longer feared, but forgotten. Soon men gathered to build a tower, a monument to themselves, a staircase to heaven made by hands. But that tale belongs to Babel, to another fall, another scattering. Still the rainbow remained, high above the clouds, silent and watchful. A reminder, not just of God's mercy, but of his memory, that he would never again destroy the earth by flood, that his covenant would outlive the corruption, that his patience would hold back wrath, waiting for something greater, because the rainbow was not the end of judgment. It was a pause, a breath before the next movement in the great symphony of redemption. It pointed forward, not to another flood, but to a cross. Not to water that washes soil, but blood that washes souls. The ark had carried animals and people, but it couldn't carry salvation. Only one would come to do that. And when he did, he would not come with thunder or rain or a wooden ark. He would come as a man, born of a woman, a descendant of Shem, a son of Noah. He would not carry people above the waters, but walk into them, into death, into darkness, and rise again with the keys of life. Jesus, the true ark, the true door. He too would be mocked. He too would be sealed away this time, not in a boat, but in a tomb. And yet, on the 3rd day, the stone would roll back like the floodwaters receding. The covenant would be fulfilled not in colors across the sky, but in scars upon his hands. And so we remember. The story of the flood is not just a tale of wrath. It is a portrait of the human condition. We build, we sin, we fall. God warns, God waits, God remembers. We are all survivors, drifting on broken planks of our own making. But above us, still, if we dare to look, there is a rainbow. It stretches across the ages, across the heavens, across every nation and tribe. It whispers, "I have not forgotten you." And its colors bleed not just water and light, but mercy and mystery. Yes, the flood was real, but so is the God who closed the door and opened it again. And today, as we breathe, as we build, as we hope, we still stand on the edge of that promise. Because though the floodwaters are gone, the door remains open, and the question lingers, will we enter before it closes again? The flood has passed, but the door remains open. And now it is your turn to choose obedience before the rain, to walk with God when the world forgets him. This was never just a story about judgment. It was always about mercy. If you've made it this far, know this: God has seen your heart, and he will bless you. Stay faithful. Stay awake. the ark may be built again, not of wood, but of truth. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And may the Lord's covenant rest over your life, now and forever. Amen.